Welcome to the Big Book Study podcast for anyone and everyone interested in a spiritual way of life. We are a step study which meets each week on Sundays at 2 p.m. Eastern and Wednesdays at 9 p.m. Eastern. You can find our website at primarypurposebigbookstudy.com. This podcast series is a brief study of each tradition as it is presented in the original 12 Steps and 12 Traditions book. Has made the difference between misery and sobriety, and often the difference between life and death. Therefore, the AA Society of Men and Women in the beginning realized the urgent need for continuous effectiveness and permanent unity, and saw that we must work together and hang together, else most of us will finally die alone. The 12 traditions of Alcoholics Anonymous are what these beginning AAs believed the best answers that their experience had given to those very urgent questions of how can AA best function and how can AA best stay whole and so survive. I'm Kathleen from Colorado. We also have Tina from Idaho and Kashi from Florida, Lisa from Michigan, Nicole from Texas, and Jacqueline from Washington. And today's study, we're going to be on tradition 1. And the short form of the tradition is our common welfare should come first. Personal recovery depends upon unity. And we're going to go through the 12 and 12 text, and we're going to comment on what we read. The first paragraph in the chapter, the unity of Alcoholics Anonymous is the most cherished quality our society has. Our lives, the lives of all to come, depend squarely upon it. We stay whole or AA dies. Without unity, the heart of AA would cease to beat. Our world arteries would no longer carry the life-giving grace of God. His gift to us would be spent aimlessly. Back again in their caves, alcoholics would reproach us and say, "What a great thing AA might have been." And I'll start off commenting, this really emphasizes how critical it is. This point here about of all that are going to come, it's like our lives depend on this unity and the lives of those that are coming that don't know about AA yet. And when we talk about AA, we're talking about all the 12-step programs, all the fellowships that are serving to help people that are miserable in their lives and can't stop, want to quit and can't stop. And it's so critical that we stay unified, and staying unified is not an easy task. And what happened is the AAs, through experience, learned what would work and what wouldn't to keep this thing going and unified so that it can continue to be helpful to us who are already here and to those that are coming. And I'll open the floor up.
This is Tina from Idaho. And what comes up for me around this is that in the 12 steps, the first thing that comes up is that Bill Wilson was sober, but was having no success for 6 months. He was not staying that way. And when he carried this message to the next in line, started working with Dr. Bob, that's when everything started to happen. So the traditions are all about bringing the spiritual principles into our relationships. And our consciousness has to expand off of me to us. And that's what they learned is they could not get and stay sober, stay recovered in a vacuum. They had to, we live in groups. It's just a reality. So we have to learn love and tolerance. And what they found was, I love what Bob Darrell says about this tradition. He says, I love them, but they annoy the shit out of me. And he says, if you're not annoyed, you're not doing anything. Right? So when we start working together, actually working shoulder to shoulder, we're going to start being annoyed with one another. And the traditions saved their bacon because it taught them how to work together and hang together. And with that, I'll pass.
Thanks, Tina. This is Nicole from Texas. Yeah, thinking about how this tradition came about, it didn't, to the best of our ability to understand the thinking of their time, they didn't really have a plan about what AA would eventually become. This was passed from Bill Wilson to Dr. Bob, and then those two went out and immediately tried to find another alcoholic that they could help. They didn't have the ability to broadcast, get the word out at a large scale, send out mass emails or put up a website. This was passed from person to person, and it is still passed on that way today. But in the beginning, there weren't really groups, meeting rooms. They were asking anyone who wanted to recover to come into their homes. And that's how it started. They would work the steps right there in their homes, and then they would send the newly recovered person out into the world to find someone that they could help. And as alcoholics began to recover, they took their recovery into their towns and their communities. And then it started to expand into churches and meeting rooms. And then what you have is 10, 20 more addicts all together in a room. And guess what happens? It starts to be beset with problems and personality conflicts and difficulties and power struggles. And they knew that our very survival depended upon us staying together. And we had to find something to unify around. And what they gave us was step 12. Having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, we tried to carry this message to other alcoholics or other addicts and to practice these principles in all our affairs. And tradition 5, each group has but one primary purpose: to carry this message to the alcoholic who still suffers. We show up to our meetings, our fellowship, our business meeting, even our talks with newcomers, and we plant our feet in those motives. And that is what we unify around, is what I'm about to say or do or offer or contribute in service to that purpose. We're there for the person who wants to quit and can't, and that they have the same opportunity that we had to work these steps and recover. Not that.
Hi, this is Lisa. I'm from Michigan. The tradition 1 tells us that we need unity. And what happened after a decade of these groups being around, that experiences were starting to happen, conflicts were arising, and the groups were able to start discerning what was working and what did not work. And so out of that came these 12 traditions. And because the group is necessary for the survival of all of us addicts, we have to conform to spiritual principles, which are the steps and the ideas of giving rather than getting, becoming our guiding principle, or else we will die. We have to give it away. So therefore, the groups are necessary as a place to give away our recovery, to help the newcomer. And to do this, we need humility. And we're part of something bigger than ourselves. And so these traditions were developed to help us to function within that group, which is bigger than us. And what we discover is that what is best for the group is best for the individual. It's not about us giving away individual freedom, but rather these are guidelines that help us to function within the group and how to get along with others in the group setting. It's not an either or. We don't give away our personality or our individual selves, but we do have to find that we do need this humility. We need to have this higher power enter in and allow ourselves to be a part of something bigger than us and let that power start to be a part of the group. And so it becomes rather an either or, either me or the group, it becomes a both and. I function better when the group functions better. The group functions better when I function better. And so these traditions help us to preserve that unity and are essential for the groups to survive. With that, I'll pass.
This is Jacqueline from Washington. And yeah, I feel inspired to reflect on without unity, the heart of AA would cease to beat. And our world arteries would no longer carry the life-giving grace of God. So to keep that heart beating, the oxygen, nutrients, water that's keeping that heart alive is us showing up and living in 10, 11, 12 and living by the principles outlined in the instructions of the big book. When it refers to God's gift to us would be spent aimlessly, we're given this clarity, we're given this new spiritual way of life. And if we move away from that, then we're no longer living out of a place of give. We start edging back into kind of our selfish ways. And the unity that's bringing us together as a group is what's keeping each of us afloat in our spiritual way of life. And it's a two-way ebb and flow of giving. We need the group in order to survive, and the group needs us in order to survive. It says, back again in their caves, alcoholics would reproach us and say, what a great thing AA might have been. Caves feels like a very apt word. When living in places of life gets very small and dark and limited. And when we turn up and we prioritize the unity and the principles of these groups, then we're living in alignment with our higher power, and it becomes a much lighter and expansive world in which to live. That I'll pass.
Okay, Tina, do you want to go ahead and read the next paragraphs?
Yes, thank you. Does this mean some will anxiously ask that in AA, the individual doesn't count for much? Is he to be dominated by his group and swallowed up in it? We may certainly answer this question with a loud no. We believe there isn't a fellowship on earth which lavishes more devoted care upon its individual members. Surely there is none which more jealously guards the individual's right to think, talk, and act as he wishes. No AA can compel another to do anything. Nobody can be punished or expelled. Our 12 steps to recovery are suggestions. The 12 traditions, which guarantee AA's unity, contain not a single don't. They repeatedly say, we ought, but never you must. I'm Tina in Idaho. And what this section brings up for me is that we become trusted servants. We come in as big shots and we end up as servants. And so what we're doing is we are giving up that kind of life that didn't work for us, this life of me. And we're starting to understand that it is only when we start living from a place of we, how can I contribute to life? How can I serve? How can I be helpful? That life really starts to mean something. One of my favorite speakers, Bob Darrell, talks about that unity, a thirst for unity. and a thirst for connection is what really is at the heart of our desperation, is that we lost our way like many before us, and we have this thirst for connection, genuine connection. And so it drives most of us, not most of us, probably the lucky few of us actually, to a bottom where we get to apply these 12 steps to our lives. And then when we start becoming trusted servants, when we start working collectively for the greater good, it really starts to transform our life in meaningful ways in all of our relationships. So, this thought that we lavish devoted care upon the individual members is clearly seen when we help take people through the steps. We offer them what was offered to us. But we also at the same time know that people can leave at step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. They don't owe us anything. They don't owe us finishing the steps. So we give this thing very freely, and we can't compel people. We can't make anyone do anything. And it's wonderful, actually, when we're talking about our recovery from codependency, this working with another is an amazing real life lesson that goes back into all of our affairs, where we really learn to just be trusted servants. We learn to just be a channel for our higher power, and we learn to really let go of outcomes. But in this unity thing with our groups, we also learn that we need to show up. We need to ask our higher power, what would you have me bring? What would you have me contribute to business meetings? What would you have me, what inspired ideas can I bring for carrying this message? So we learn for the very first time to become this intelligent agent of God's ever expanding creation. And I pass.
Thanks, Tina. Kathleen here. So this is great. I think about if one of us shows up at a meeting, anybody shows up at a meeting, whether we've never been to one before or we used to go to meetings and now we're desperate again and we're coming back, we can tell the group anything that's happened. I burned down my house. I ran over somebody because I was drinking. Whatever it is, we can talk about that in the meeting, and people in the meeting will say, Kathleen, I'm so glad to see you. Sounds like you need to be here. Welcome. We're always welcome here. It doesn't matter what we've done, and we don't have to be here. No one has to be here. That is between them and their higher power. And this unity is not trying to take away anybody's autonomy to decide to be here. But we care about the people here. And the way that we care about the people is not just the steps, but it's through the traditions. Because we'll learn in many other traditions, there's something about how we want to hear, all of us want to hear everybody's voices when we're doing a group conscience or whatever it is. We want to hear the consciousness come through, God's consciousness or higher powers consciousness come through each individual. And we might not like what they say. And what a fantastic way to learn how to live. And this is going to take practice, and it's going to take time, and it's a new way. And it's not just a great way to do here in our 12-step meetings, but it's a great way to live with our families and our partners and our workplaces. But we don't lose who we are, but we learn how to work together, which is something addicts, all of us, codependents, overeater, all of us, we have a terrible time in our relationships with other people. And especially with groups, it can get really bad. We have a lifetime of leaving groups, abandoning people. And this is learning a new way of being part of a unified group. And this is so important. This is tradition 1. We have to stay unified. And so how do we do that? Thanks.
Thanks, Kathleen. This is Nicole from Texas, and thinking about this idea of individual from the context of addiction, it's all about me, like what we want, our little plans and ideas is the center of our thinking. And approaching a group or even just one individual, we're thinking about what will get us liked, what will get us approval, or how do we need to hide out so that we can not get not liked or not approved of, or we think that we're the best at something or we're the worst at something or we're the most right or the most wrong. So it's all about being rooted in our addiction and feeling badly about ourselves and wanting something on the outside to make us feel better. And so think then turning that to our primary purpose and turning from trying to get something to giving something and thinking about the individual. It's each individual voice is showing up in our primary purpose and trying to bring their own higher power consciousness to carry this same message. So it's like an orchestra that's all playing the same song, but everyone is singing in their own key. And every single voice is needed and necessary. Every single individual is important for the person who's yet to recover because we never know what their disease is tuned to. And our hope is that they come to the meeting and someone singing their disease and recovery in a certain key, and that person, their illness is tuned into that. And what they might say is, that sounds like me. And that gives them just a little bit of hope that if they recognize their illness, that maybe, and they're hearing the solution, that maybe the solution might work for them too. So the individual is important, but we're again like unifying around that purpose. And I'll pass. Thanks.
Thanks, Nicole. This is Jacqueline from Washington. Surely there is none which more jealously guards the individual's right to think, talk, and act as he wishes. So this is a group where we have come because we were thinking, talking, and acting as we wished, and it was driving us into our bottom. And in the groups, we're shown a completely new way of living, one that's connected to a higher power of our own making. And there are clear instructions that are offered of how to maintain that connection on a daily basis and how to maintain that spiritual way of life. And it does so without setting strict rules. As it says, the 12 traditions which guarantee AA's unity contain not a single don't. They repeatedly say we ought, but never you must. So this isn't a program of imprisonment or limited thinking. It's quite the opposite. It's expansive in its freedom of autonomy, and it's an opportunity where the instructions are clearly laid out when we work with a sponsor, and we get to make the choice on a daily basis whether or not we live in alignment with those principles as outlined in the steps and the traditions. And when we do follow those, then our thinking, talking, and acting takes care of itself because it's inspired by our higher power. And with that, I'll pass. Thank you.
Thank you, Jacqueline. Hi, it's Lisa from Michigan. The big book tells us that our selfishness is the root of our problem. And this applies to us no matter what our symptoms are, whether we're codependents, overeaters, drug addicts. It doesn't matter what the symptoms are. We all have this selfishness at the root. And these traditions and working within the group gives us this opportunity to practice something new. Before we took these steps and got recovered, we were living in a way of what can I get? What can I control? I want it my way or the highway. And then we become a part of this something greater where we can see that our little ways and our petty obsessions weren't serving anybody. They not only didn't serve us, but they didn't serve our groups. And so these traditions help us become a part of something bigger than ourselves and to start practicing these principles. It gives us a way to move within a group and start to practice the opposite of selfishness, the idea of giving to give, the idea of thinking of the other, thinking of what's larger, and letting higher power come in and guide our actions and guide first our thoughts and then our actions. And so this gives us a way where the rubber meets the road, where we actually start to practice these principles by using them within the group structure. With that, I'll pass.
This is Tina in Idaho, and I just have another quick comment. So it's always important for me to remember, what is this all about? What are we unifying around? And what we're unifying around is carrying this message, not my good ideas, not anybody's ego. It's carrying this message. And what is this message? This message is the instructions for the 12 steps that are found in the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous. That's what saved their lives. That's what they passed on to us in the form of the book to help save our lives. And I pass.
Thanks, Tina. This is Nicole. We'll go ahead and pick up the next paragraph. To many minds, all this liberty for the individual spells sheer anarchy. Every newcomer, every friend who looks at AA for the first time is greatly puzzled. They see liberty verging on license, yet they recognize at once that AA has an irresistible strength of purpose and action. How, they ask, can such a crowd of anarchists function at all? How can they possibly place their common welfare first? What in heaven's name holds them together? And I'll open it up to the room for comments.
Hi, it's Lisa from Michigan. Had a brief comment. Yeah, so this idea of liberty versus the idea of license. License is this idea that we can do whatever we want without any concern for anyone else. And that's not our goal. That's not helpful or useful to a group or to an individual. But we maintain this idea of liberty, that we do have the right to have our own thoughts and ideas. And we get to have the freedom to live this new way of life, but it's within these guidelines that we consider others, that we consider, how does this action impact myself? How does it impact others? And focusing on the greater good. And that is the only thing that we use as a guideline is going to serve the greater good. And so we consult with our higher power in that, because as a person, we have a limited perspective, but when we connect with higher power, we can start to have a better idea of how we impact others. And we can start to see that what we do isn't just about ourselves. Everything that we do has a consequence and has an impact for the rest of the group, for the rest of the people, for the world, whatever it is. And we again learn this spiritual law that what's good for us is good for others, but we have to develop this conscience and develop this idea of connecting around something bigger and better than us, and not around our particular personal preferences. And with that, I'll pass.
Thanks, Felicia. This is Nicole. Looking at the history of AA, when their groups began to form and this infighting and arguments began to happen, AA didn't really get involved. They didn't offer advice. They didn't tell anyone how to act. What they did was they offered guidance in the form of these traditions, which are really spiritual principles that we try to live by. And what they could see was that we didn't need people to govern our meetings, that we had to quit playing God. It didn't work. It didn't work in our lives. It didn't work in our families. It didn't work in our groups. So it was the beginning of this practice of learning to put their trust in a higher power. And Bill Wilson said that those who really need this thing stay. And those who have some other motive or some other reason for being here will eventually fall away. So if we really need this thing, we will find a way to conform to these spiritual principles and work within them. And if we really need this thing, we will find a way and a willingness to work these steps. And we walk through all of our discomfort and we do it anyway. We walk through all of our discomfort and we try and carry this message and we leave the results to a higher power. And that's all I had. I'll pass there.
Hi, this is Kashi in Florida. And this part where they're talking about, yet they recognize at once that AA has an irresistible strength of purpose and action. And so the purpose and the action that we're given is that we work the steps when we first come in and we have a sponsor. And then we continue. We learn how to live the steps. And the purpose and the action that we have in living in the steps is to pass along what's been passed on to us. That continues to keep us in action, working for the needs of those who are like us, who are asking for help. And we pass on what our sponsor passed on to us, which is what their sponsor passed on to them. And so we stay in this action of passing along the program being the 12 steps being the solution. And so further down, they talk about the common welfare first. What in heaven's name holds them together is the solution. So yeah, we come in with all these problems, and everybody has problems, but we do share the same problem, the spiritual malady. That what holds us together and our common solution is the spiritual solution. And that's the thing that keeps us in strength of purpose and action. Thanks.
Thanks, Kashi. Kathleen. So I'm looking at this word anarchy, and basically what they're talking about, there's no political government, there's no political governing. And how in the world are they doing that? How does that work? That's chaos. There's nobody in charge. And this is one of the things that actually has not having that, but rather having these traditions. So it's the traditions and the principles in them that is what's in charge. And a higher power is ultimately what's in charge that comes through these traditions. So it's a very different way of doing things, but it works. And people don't understand it because our world isn't built this way. Might benefit from it, but it's a way of, we're going to study all 12 of them. So you get it once you have seen it in action and you see the purpose behind it. You see what's happening, and they want to stay a part of the group because nobody's particular is running the group, but rather a higher power is running it, and everybody has a voice, but it's not chaos. There is a structure to it because that voice comes through simple principles, not just any voice. We don't just voice anything. We voice it through these principles, and it keeps us focused. And this principle is unity and how important it is for us to stay together. So when we get on our high horse or we get annoyed with somebody, or at the end of the day, if we remember this principle right here, it's unity that's important, we will reconsider that we are the only ones that have the right idea. And we will open back up to the consideration that the group in common may have the right idea. Thanks.
Thanks, Kathleen. This is Tina in Idaho. I love this section. It reminds me that we are all here, those of us who stay, because we hit a bottom where most of us didn't even really want to continue living. So we have those very necessary ingredients, which are being humble, teachable, and willing to go to any lengths. It reminds me of this section in the Big Book on page 117, and there's a solution. It says, we are average Americans. All sections of this country and many of its occupations are represented, as well as many political, economic, social, and religious backgrounds. We are people who normally would not mix, but there exists among us a fellowship, a friendliness, and an understanding which is indescribably wonderful. We are like the passengers of a great liner the moment after rescue from shipwreck, when camaraderie, joyousness, and democracy pervade the vessel from steerage to captain's table. Unlike the feelings of the ship's passengers, however, our joy and escape from disaster does not subside as we go our individual ways. The feeling having shared in a common peril is one element in the powerful cement which binds us, but that in itself would never have held us together as we are now joined. The tremendous fact for every one of us is that we've discovered a common solution. We have a way out on which we can absolutely agree and upon which we can join in brotherly and harmonious action. This is the great news this book carries to those who suffer from alcoholism and other addictions. So that is what we know, and we don't know it intellectually. We know it experientially. We know it because we've lived it. We know it because we wanted to die, and then somebody offered to be helpful, and we accepted their offer. We worked these 12 steps, and it saved our lives. And we give this thing back because we have to carry this message in order to keep it. And then at the same time, it ends up being just a joyful, just that ship was talked about. It just becomes this, there becomes a camaraderie and a joyousness and a democracy. So we no longer think we know the best for individuals. And we also no longer think we know the best for our group. And that's why we fall in love with group conscience. That's why we fall in love with our business meetings, is because that's where our higher power shows up in guiding this ship. And with that, I pass.
It's Lisa. I'll read the next paragraph. Those who look closely soon have the key to this strange paradox. The AA member has to conform to the principles of recovery. His life actually depends upon obedience to spiritual principles. If he deviates too far, the penalty is sure and swift. He sickens and dies. At first, he goes along because he must, but later he discovers a way of life he really wants to live. Moreover, he finds he cannot keep this priceless gift unless he gives it away. Neither he nor anybody else can survive unless he carries the AA message. The moment this 12-step work forms a group, another discovery is made, that most individuals cannot recover unless there is a group. Realization dawns that he is but a small part of a great whole, that no personal sacrifice is too great for the preservation of the fellowship. He learns that the clamor of desires and ambitions within him must be silenced whenever these could damage the group. It becomes plain that the group must survive or the individual will not. And so my comments on this are, the big book tells us that faith without works is dead. And so this applies to us working the program on an individual basis, but it also applies for the fellowship. If no one volunteered to chair a meeting or read during the meeting or comment, and we just had one person, it wouldn't be a meeting. It would be a lecture. It would be a class. And so it wouldn't be a way that we get involved, that we become a part of something greater than ourselves. And so we learn to start to serve within our group as a part of belonging, and we choose to belong. We make a decision that we need this way of life. We see that we're going to die if we don't live this way of life, if we don't do this. And so part of that becomes participating in our group. And we are all part of this Sunday meeting that meets at 2 p.m. Eastern and Wednesday at 9 p.m. It's a big book study for all. And so all who are invited, who are interested in the spiritual way of life, and we become a part of it and we agree to be a part of it. But if we see something that we think could maybe be improved upon, we can bring that as to our monthly group conscience meeting, understanding again that it's not about personal preferences, but perhaps we have an idea that could benefit all. And so we bring it to the conscience, and everyone again who chooses to be a part of the meeting, who chooses to take part, can vote, can have their voice heard on the subject, and they can vote. And this is a way that everybody gets to be a part of it. We belong because we choose to belong. And we start participating in ways that are helpful for everybody. And part of our structure in that study is that we offer comments, those of us who have taken the 12 steps, because we have the knowledge of working the steps and we have started to see the results. And we comment on what we read in the big book as a way of helping others. It wouldn't be helpful for a newcomer to come in and to begin to ask questions during the book study or to offer their ideas because they haven't worked the steps. And so we have that structure in place because it has proven to be helpful and useful. And so, again, that's an example of how we do what's helpful. When we're new, we might have this urge that I have to talk, I have to get my viewpoint across, but that's really not helpful. That's really part of our disease that wants to act out. And part of this big book study that we're all a part of is we are learning to have this new way where we say we connect with higher power before them and ask that we be given the words to share that would be helpful and useful to others, that higher power might speak through us, that we might share something that might just touch another person and they might be inspired and hoped and have hope. We can all bond around the problem, but that doesn't give us that hope. That doesn't move us forward. And so we've chosen in this meeting to share around the solution because the solution is what is most helpful. We can meet with a sponsor and discuss what our problem is, and we can see how we can relate, and that's important to do. And we can also do that on the fellowship portion of the meeting. But what's most helpful for everyone are the instructions of the big book because that's what has saved millions of lives. And again, it's this idea of something that's bigger than ourselves, than our individuality, something that is on this higher level, that's higher power inspired, that has been around for close to 100 years at this point as a new way of life. And so we're here and we have this humility to work the steps because we're miserable. We can't find any way out. We've tried everything and nothing has worked. Then we follow these instructions and we allow ourselves to conform to the group, a word that maybe we don't like to hear a whole lot in our world today, but it is necessary. It's necessary to have something bigger than us be in charge. That's our higher power. The higher power is what needs to come through the group because that's the solution. That's where the solution is. And so we can bond around that and share that's where we're going to be most helpful. And with that, I'll pass.
Thanks, Lisa. Kathleen here. So let's think about this for a minute. In this paragraph, if we all day long, we make decisions, whether we're addicts or not, and oftentimes, if we're not desperate enough or we don't give things up, we don't give things up very easily. But if we are so desperate, which is what is part of the formula for an addict, if we are so desperate and we want to die, it's in that moment then that we can start to let go of our what we think are the right ideas. It's in that moment that we choose it's humility basically. And a lot of times we don't have humility until we're humbled, and we're humbled by desperation. And so if we push that forward and think about the fellowship, if we have to have the fellowship to stay recovered and other people have to have the fellowship to get recovered, then we're going to feel the same way about the fellowship. We have to keep this going. And how are we going to do that? Or we have to try to keep it going. Higher power is what keeps it going, but we have to try. And unity, and which means some conformity, which means letting go sometimes, and the practice of letting go. It also means speaking up and not hiding. And so we have to bring that to keep the unity. And unity is so critical for our survival and for the survival of the group. Thanks.
Thanks, Kathleen. This is Nicole. And looking at this part of the reading where it says at first he goes along because he must, but later he discovers a way of life he really wants to live. So, we conform to spiritual principles because we have to, because what we were doing didn't work. And we got to such a point of suffering and were completely out of ideas that we finally surrendered. We became humble and we asked for help and we became willing to follow directions. We became open to the idea of a higher power. Some of us really resisted that idea. But when you're out of options, all of a sudden, it opens up new places in your brain to become willing to let new ideas in. And little by little, we're doing this practice, the 12 steps, and we begin to turn from our selfish and self centered and self seeking motives to what we can contribute, what we can bring, how we can think about others, what we can do for the person who's still suffering. And as we do that, our mental obsession begins to lift. So it's like this thing that we've been chasing by trying to get something to make us feel better. It just arrives by accident or by design, but not by intention. Our focus is on staying connected to our higher power and doing our higher power's work. There's a quote on page 181 of the Big Book of AA, Dr. Bob's Nightmare, where he talks about why he passes this thing on. And I think anyone who has worked these steps and this becomes the experience that he describes so aptly. He says, I spend a great deal of time passing on what I learned to others who want and need it badly. I do it for 4 reasons. 1, sense of duty. 2, it is a pleasure. 3, because in doing so, I am paying my debt to the man who took time to pass it on to me. 4, because every time I do it, I take out a little more insurance for myself against a possible slip. And I'll pass.
Thanks, Nicole. This is Jacqueline from Washington. If he deviates too far, the penalty is sure and swift. He sickens and dies. If we move away from these spiritual principles and that fog of self-will and a get mentality pervades, we feel it. We came into the rooms because we were at a rock bottom and didn't want to continue to live. And when we start working that program, we work our 12 steps and we start getting a feel for what it's like to live in conformity with these principles of recovery, our world just expands. There's light that comes into the rooms again. But the minute that we start turning away from that, the light dims again. And those kind of jagged rocks of misery just become more and more sharp. So there's this built-in compass, and the acuity with which we're brought back to a true north becomes more finite with time, which is a real blessing. There are immediate repercussions that we feel. The penalty is sure and swift. He sickens and dies. We can feel when we're out of alignment. We can feel when we're not connected to higher power. We can feel when we're not doing higher power's work well. And it transposes itself in our life. We see the contrast from when we are in alignment, when we are tapped into that aquifer of common truth, capital T truth, or intuition, or there are a lot of synonyms that we could use for that, but higher power. Yeah, we feel and see that misery in our lives and the giving away. So he finds he cannot keep this priceless gift unless he gives it away. By walking alongside our proteges and walking through the steps, not only are we sharing that we share the same problem, that same pool of misery that we're coming from, but we quickly turn and focus on solution, the remaining 11 steps. And we are reminded by our proteges of where we were at our rock bottom. And we're reminded of the steps as we go through them. And we can't offer those steps if we're not living them ourselves. That hypocrisy is a sharp point of misery as well. So if we're not living in alignment, we feel that. And so in offering these steps and living in steps 12, it's keeping us honest, first and foremost with ourselves and with our higher power. With that, I'll pass.
It's Tina in Idaho. So this statement that says, the moment the 12-step work forms a group, another discovery is made that most individuals cannot recover unless there is a group. Realization dawns that he is but a small part of a great whole. So this reminds me of the origin of the primary purpose meetings which is documented in Joe McHugh's book, The Steps We Took, how when good ideas, human solutions started to seep into our fellowships, counseling had started and there was a lot of self-help going on. It had been very successful in the 30s, 40s, 50s, and even the beginning of the 60s, 75 to 92% success rate. But when those kinds of things, those kind of human solutions started to seep into our meetings, the success rate started to drop and it got down to 5% by 2002. And when we stopped carrying the message and following the 12 steps, doing as the steps point out in the instructions, and started to be about human solutions and ego returned, then our group started to die. And fortunately, Joe and Charlie brought this primary purpose method back and revived our fellowships. And that's why we're here today, is because of them returning us, bringing us back to the precise instructions found in the big book of AA. So to me, this tradition, this unity tradition, and the fact that it is so very important that we carry this message, that this is the message that is going to save our lives. This is the message that has saved our lives. This is the message that we can help others around. And without pass.
Thanks, Tina. This is Kashi in Florida. This part here where it says, if he deviates too far, the penalty is sure and swift. He sickens and dies. So this is a self-diagnosed disease. It's a spiritual malady, and nobody can tell anybody else that they are or aren't an alcoholic, or they are or aren't another addict of any other kind. We are the ones who get to learn about the information that our sponsors give us through the big book to give us the tests needed to help qualify us, whether we belong here or not. And we are the ones who get to say, yeah, I am. And this is what I need help with. And this is right for me. And when it says he sickens and dies, it could mean a physical death, but it can also mean an emotional and spiritual death. And so with that, I pass. Okay, we're going to move on to the next paragraph. This is Kashi in Florida. So at the onset, how best to live and work together as groups became the prime questions. In the world about us, we saw personalities destroying whole peoples. The struggle for wealth, power, and prestige was tearing humanity apart as never before. If strong people were stalemated, if strong people were stalemated in the search for peace and harmony, what was to become of our erratic band of alcoholics? As we had once struggled and prayed for individual recovery, just so earnestly did we commence to quest for the principles through which AA itself might survive. On anvils of experience, the structure of our society was hammered out. And I have a comment on that. So just to give a timeline of the history, just real quick. So Bill W. and Dr. Bob met in 1935. And then the big book was written in 1939. So there had been small groups of people meeting, practicing the steps, but it was not written down in a format, official format, until 1939. And then the 12 Steps and 12 Traditions was written in 1953. So thinking of how a blacksmith shapes metal on an anvil, on anvils of experience, really illustrates and sums up the whole paragraph. It's a metaphor referring to the process of forging something strong, durable, and refined through hardship, the trials and the errors and the lived experience. And so for almost 20 years, they have this lived experience through pain and failure and struggle that resulted in writing this book and putting the traditions down. It resulted in the character that they built, the sets of principles, and the structure that they cultivated. So that's this expression on anvils of experience they forged through the hardship, and the anvil representing a solid foundation while the experience serves as a hammer blow. So the traditions came about not theoretically, almost 18 years of them having all these trials and errors and pain and failure and struggle. But so it didn't come about theoretically. They were beaten out of in a response to real and difficult problems that the fellowships faced. And with that, I pass.
Thanks, Kashi. Kathleen here. Yeah, they're just the pointing towards humanity, how we struggle, how wealth and power and prestige, a big part of our humanity, a big part of our personal self. We're working with this stuff all the time. And that these are the things that will destroy things if they can destroy things. And there's another tradition later on that addresses some of this more specifically, a couple traditions. They say tearing humanity apart. Knowing that, then we can't have that in the meeting. That's not going to create unity. If we've got prestige and power and wealth going on in this group, in this fellowship, in this worldwide fellowship, if we have that going on, we're going to end up tearing each other apart. And then we can't be helpful and useful, we can't survive, and people that need recovery can't survive. And then their point here is there's all these people at this time, I guess, searching for peace and harmony and how hard it is for them. But then you bring in a band of alcoholics, right? Like we are just like, we're going to be hopeless, right? We're erratic. We can't keep anything consistent. We can't take care of ourselves. We can't at all tell truth from false from our own thinking. And it's like, what in the world is going to help us survive if it's so hard with people that aren't alcoholics trying to find a way to survive and have some peace and harmony? But these traditions and unity, being the one we're studying today, is what began to bring that peace and harmony to the fellowship and to help it sustain and remain and be helpful and useful. Thanks.
Thanks, Kathleen. This is Nicole. I looked at a little history on Bill Wilson had studied a group that was pre-AA, and they were a group of alcoholics that were helping other alcoholics stay sober. And they were having a lot of success. They were doing a lot of good, and they were growing, and they grew to very large numbers. And then over time, they started to fall apart, and eventually they disbanded. And Bill Wilson wanted to understand why, what lessons can we take from what happened to them? And what they shared and what he learned was that the group had this purpose to help alcoholics, and then they started to bring in outside issues They took on, some of them really well intentioned, like taking on political and important social issues of their time. They started to have ideas about other ways they could branch off and help the idea or disease of alcoholism, like opening hospitals and going into business ventures. And eventually, problems of personality, money, prestige, power, these things just, they lost their purpose and the groups didn't survive. We as human beings, and then was said, you add the addict piece into it, we can take one step to the left or one step to the right, and we will find something that we divide on, find something that we disagree about. Instead of focusing on that problem, what I see in this paragraph is them turning toward the solution. What is the solution? Is that there is one thing that we can absolutely agree on. And it was previously read on page 17 of the Big Book of AA. They said the tremendous fact for each of us is that we have discovered a common solution. We have a way out on which we can absolutely agree and upon which we can join in brotherly and harmonious action. And I'll pass there.
Thank you, Nicole. Yeah, I just wanted to comment that this section about us all almost losing it, not being able to do this. And the thing that has helped is that we now have learned how to do a group conscience meeting. We have learned how to not only engage our higher power in our individual lives, but we have learned how to engage our higher power in the trajectory of our meetings. So we do this incredible thing every month where tradition one, our common welfare should come first. Personal progress for the greatest number depends upon unity. Therefore, please, number one, ask your higher power what, if anything, you might contribute, seeking only to unify around our primary purpose. 2, share what you're guided to share or share nothing if guided. 3, listen to others, share their guidance. It's not a time for questions and answers. We don't interrupt, crosstalk, counterpoint, fault find, criticize, or argue. 4, vote your conscience or abstain, whatever you feel led to do. And then we state our motions. They have to be seconded to proceed. And then when you second something, it means you agree. And then we do our higher power guided shares, 1 minute per person per issue, timed. Then all in favor state their name, all opposed state their name, all abstaining state their name. And then the minority has an opportunity to speak, and then people can change their vote if they choose. At that point, if the motion is passed, only those who voted against may speak. If the motion has failed, only those who voted in favor may speak. So this is actually talks about action in this book. And we're actually doing our business meeting this Sunday. And it just thrills me every time we do it, because I get to witness higher power in action in our group conscience. It doesn't always go my way, but it always goes higher power's way. And with that, I'll pass.
This is Jacqueline in Washington. I'll go ahead and read the last 2 paragraphs of Tradition 1. Countless times in as many cities and hamlets, we reenacted the story of Eddie Rickenbacker and his courageous company when their plane crashed in the Pacific. Like us, they had suddenly found themselves saved from death, but still floating upon a perilous sea. How well they saw that their common welfare came first. None might become selfish of water or bread. Each needed to consider the others, and in abiding faith, they knew they must find their real strength. And this they did find, in measure to transcend all the defects of their frail craft, every test of uncertainty, pain, fear, and despair, and even the death of one. Thus has it been with AA. By faith and by works, we have been able to build upon the lessons of an incredible experience. They live today in the 12 traditions of Alcoholics Anonymous, which, God willing, shall sustain us in unity for so long as he may need us. I'm tempted to give a little bit of just a historical background to the reference of Eddie Rickenbacker. So he was born in 1890 and in World War I was considered the ace of all aces. So he had 26 verified aerial victories and was more decorated than any other American in the war, including a Medal of Honor. And it wasn't until 1942, so this is well past World War I ended in 1918, I believe. So this is well past World War I. He was asked to travel to the Pacific Theater to report of soldiers, and they had to do a landing on the Pacific in a Boeing B-17. So there were 8 people aboard, and Rickenbacker had 60 feet of line that he took from the plane. And that was one of the most key pieces of equipment that they had during this time. They ended up being stranded at sea for 24 days. One person passed away, but the remaining 7 survived. And with that 60 feet of line, they tied together the 3 rescue rafts that they were able to salvage from the plane wreck and live out in the middle of the Pacific amidst the peaks and troughs of waves, being attacked by sharks, all the inclement weather. They were facing starvation, dehydration, sunburn, and I believe it was the pilot had put 4 oranges in his pockets, and so 8 men survived on 4 oranges for the first 8 days. And I don't want to get too bogged down in this, but just to comment on the unity, they couldn't be thinking about themselves. They had to work together to stay afloat. And one of the things that Rickenbacker also inspired in the group, at one point, one of the men tried to slip overboard and basically give up. And he denied that person that, and he would organize a group prayer every night. And some of the other members actually made a pact that they would survive, if only to outlive Rickenbacker, because he was so atrociously abrasive in his demands for their morale to stay up. So anyway, back to the actual tradition, they end up getting rescued. And this is similar. We found ourselves saved from death. We've been given the tools of the 12 steps, and we are no longer living a life that we wanted to either end, or we were so horribly miserable. Yet we're still floating upon this perilous sea. There's still the temptation, there's still the rest of the world out there, there's still our thinking, first and foremost, that can take us back into the depths of the perilous sea. And what is required of us to stay afloat is staying connected to higher power, doing higher power's work well, and staying part of living these principles on a daily basis. I have other context to this whole thing, but I'll pass for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Jacqueline. It's Lisa. I wanted to comment on this idea of looking for our similarities and not our differences. And if we're in this fellowship, if we're a part of this, we've hit a bottom. We were drowning. And to continue the metaphor a little bit, we were drowning and we found a life raft and we grabbed onto that as a way to survive. And that was the steps, that was the solution that we found through working the steps. We were brought into this common solution. And so to continue to survive, we need to continue to pass this message along. And we do this in large part as part of groups, as part of meetings, because the newcomer has to be sought out. And meetings were established as a way for the newcomer to connect to the steps and the solution. And we have this meeting for all this particular group that all of us on the podcast are a part of, and we look for similarities, and it doesn't matter. They're all different types of addicts in the meeting. Some are behavioral addictions, some have substance addictions. A lot of us have multiple addictions. But again, we all share this spiritual malady. And so the solution is also the same for all of us. And so we connect around this solution. And so the meeting is to share this message. And it's this message, it's not our message, it's not our personal ideas, but it's the message, the steps, the solution. And so, in order to continue to do this, we have to be united. And so, we unite around what's similar. We're no longer sitting in judgment or criticism or blame, like those, that's part of our disease. And so, being a part of this group helps us to practice our recovery, which is that we look for the good, we look for how we're all really the same. And when we do this, we shut down this idea of us versus them. Instead, we're all together, we're all united, we're all on this life craft together. And if we don't preserve our unity and we don't work together towards this common goal, we're not going to survive. And as was mentioned, it could be an emotional death, it could be a physical death, but we need this. We wouldn't do all this work and take these steps if we could just decide that we were going to be different. We have to do the work, we have to participate. And part of that is being a part of the group. It's not something that we can do in isolation. Isolation is our disease. Isolation is what brought us here. This idea that our thinking could provide the solution, that we could figure it out, that we could do this alone. The self-reliance or the syndrome of being our own higher power or making others our higher power. These were all the things that brought us to our bottom. And now we're called to be a part of something bigger and not to run the show, but to just have our place, to be the actor in the play and only do our part and not run the show. And that's a challenge for us, but it's actually what's required to stay in this state of humility where we take our ego down. We surrender to something bigger and better. We surrender to higher power. And when we do that, higher power is able to flow through the group and we're able to chart this course together that leads us into the promised land, which is what all of us want. With that, I'll pass.
Thanks, Lisa. This is Nicole. This description of suddenly found themselves saved from death, but still floating on a perilous sea. It's such a parallel to what it feels like to be living without this spiritual solution. It feels just the depths of uncertainty, pain, fear, despair, close to death or wanting to die. And we asked for help, and someone offered these precise directions on how they recovered. And when we're without a solution and we've tried every possible human solution to solve our problems, and many of us, there was a mental obsession of focusing on our problem and trying to dissect our problem to the point where we would eventually find a solution, that the solution lied somewhere in the mess of the problem. And we just kept digging a deeper hole. So when we finally get a hold of something that works, if we have this spiritual malady and we apply this solution and it works, like we can't wait to pass it on. We can't wait to share it with the next person. And there's this idea that all of us, no matter what our circumstances, what we grew up in, there's a commonality that we share, this place of uncertainty, pain, fear, and despair, but we don't unify there. We all know that we share that, but what they have us in the steps and in these 12 traditions is to turn toward the solution and turning towards what they say. It says here on page 152 of the Big Book of AA, you'll be bound to them with new and wonderful ties, for you will escape disaster together, and you will commence shoulder to shoulder your common journey. Then you will know what it means to give of yourself that others may survive and rediscover life. So initially, we pass this on because we have to. And eventually, we pass this on because we want to. And we form these ties in our groups of great love and affection, even amid the mess and the struggles and the difficulties, because we're all headed toward the same purpose. And I'll pass there.
Thank you, Nicole. So we make a messed up mess of our lives. We, just like a shipwreck, we have this thirst for connection with God and with others, but we feel bad about ourselves. Underlying our disease is old ideas. I'm a piece of crap. I don't belong. I got nothing to offer. And we wreck our lives trying to run from those things, those lies about ourselves. And we end up wrecking our lives, having a shipwreck of a life. And then we become humble and teachable and willing to ask for help. And then we get to experience this incredible recovery process, both as individuals and then something that we never even hoped to hope for was that we get to actually learn how to be part of a community, how to be intelligent agents of God's ever expanding creation, how to live the purpose that we were born for, and to have it flow through us out into the world. And with that, I'll pass.
Thanks, Tina. This is Jacqueline from Washington. I just wanted to add a little bit to the Eddie Rickenbacker story because I find it fascinating. On the 8th day, things were looking pretty grim. They made it through their 4 oranges, and Rickenbacker again was a header for having them read from the Bible. And there was a particular section that they read, and a loose translation is basically saying, what I'm trying to do here is to get you to relax, to not be so preoccupied with getting, so you can respond to God's giving. People who don't know God and the way he works fuss over these things, both God and how he works. Steep your life in God reality, God initiative, God provisions. Don't worry about missing out. You'll find all your everyday human concerns will be met. Give your entire attention to what God is doing right now and don't get worked up about what may or may not happen tomorrow. God will help you deal with whatever hard things come up when the time comes. So this was a particular verse that they read, and the reason I share it is not because I'm trying to endorse any particular literature, but as part of the story, 20 minutes after they read this, one of the crew had him repeat it because it landed with such an impact. And 20 minutes later, a seagull landed on Rickenbacker's head, and that sustained the crew for the next several days. And so just within that reference alone, within tradition 1 of Eddie Rickenbacker, the story is a fascinating one. But again, they talk about each needed to consider the others, and in abiding faith, they knew they must find their real strength. And there was a unity around this faith that brought them together in sometimes miraculous ways. The rest of the world had written them off as deceased 2 weeks into their time at sea, and they ended up being out there for 24 days. And anyway, I wanted to expand a little bit more in that story because I found it profound. Thank you.
Thank you, Jacqueline. So we're coming to the end of our podcast here. And Tina, if you want to go ahead and read the long form of the tradition, and then we'll just go ahead and close. I think we've gotten lots of great comments, and we'll just pause there.
Tradition 1, long form. Each member of Alcoholics Anonymous is but a small part of a great whole. AA must continue to live, or most of us will surely die. Hence, our common welfare comes first, but individual welfare follows close afterward.
Thank you. That's a great paragraph to end on. So, thank you, all of you who have contributed today to this podcast. And thanks, everyone out there, for joining us to learn all about Tradition One and unity and how important that is. Our next podcast, we're going to look at Tradition Two. So, please join us for that. And as a reminder, you can find our meetings at primarypurposebigbookstudy.com. We meet each week on Sundays at 2 p.m. Eastern and Wednesdays at 9 p.m. Eastern. You will find the Zoom links on that website on the homepage. Please join us on the road of happy destiny.